Okay, hello everyone. Today I'm going to be presenting the history of and meetings of the Estates General by myself, of course. So thesis and context. For my thesis statement, I'm going to be saying during a political and or financial crisis, French monarchs would summon the Estates General to both solve the crisis and reaffirm royal power, despite the massive risks doing that where you would embarrass yourself. However, in calling the Estates General, the French monarchy opened the door to political reform by way of consensus and representation. This precedent would lay the groundwork for future events, aka the revolution, and other things I'm going to talk about. Basically, it's in the sense of letting the cat out of the bag. You know, you give the people political reform and representation, and it's gonna be, you can't, like a century or two later, try to put it back in. You can't put the cat back in. It's gonna be bad. It's gonna be terrible, and you're gonna see that down the line. And so, for context, for people who don't know, the States General was, as I think Professor Adams put it really well, a pseudo-parliament made up of 3 estates, and it would advise the monarch on financial and political matters. The first estate being, of course, the clergy, second, the nobility, and third, the commoners, basically everyone else. So, moving on. The first Estates General was called in 1302 by King Philip IV of France. The king needed support against Pope Boniface VIII, who opposed his taxation of the clergy. The Estates General, this one was basically, I think this was the most successful and the easiest one, the best, most successful one the French monarchy ever had. It cemented royal power, not over the church, but just in general royal prestige, and really just it was an easy win for the monarchy. However, one thing you're going to see through these early assemblies is that the vast majority of French people, the peasants, aren't going to be represented in the third estate like you'd think. Instead, they're going to be represented by their lords, the nobles, because by terms of what's left of the French feudalism, in this sense, the lords have control and representation of their peasantry, and they should, by quotation marks, be the best representation for the people, when in reality, of course, that wasn't the real situation. But in these early ones, you see that. And so in reality, for most of these early assemblies, the third estate is mostly just going to be the middle class, government officials, the urban bourgeoisie, and so on. And of course, this is a painting depicting it with King Philip in the middle there. One thing you see is how small in scale this is. Like, it's very close knit with maybe 30, maybe 50 people. And later on, all these different paintings are going to have hundreds of people. And this was made by Jean Arlox. So now moving on. The States General of 1355 to 1358. This was the longest one, in no small part to royal capture and a lot of treason and whatnot. So it was called by King John II, or King John the Good. Sorry if you hear those screams. I think someone's getting murdered, but let's move on. Due to the ongoing failures of the 100 Years' War with England so far, John II assembled it to raise new taxes for the war effort. So, and while John was able to get these taxes, the States General also needed concessions, and they were able to get greater oversight over the royal finances. And so later on, when John was captured by the English, the Estates General used this as their this vacuum to take power and try to pass a series of reforms, and this was led by Atene Marcel. And they fought with the king's heir, Charles, or as they would call the Dauphin. Charles would later on be the Charles V, but for right now he's just the heir. And there's this struggle as John was captured, and the struggle between the heir and Marcel. And during all of this, a French peasant revolt happens called the Jacqueria, and this challenges royal power. However, in the end, what could have maybe become the stepping stones of a French parliament similar to the British Parliament completely collapsed. The revolt was crushed. Marcel lost power and then was eventually assassinated. And once King John was reclaimed from capture, he and his son were able to reassert royal power and just completely eliminate any concessions that the Estates General was able to claw from the monarchy. So now, moving on. The next one, the Estates General of 1484. This one is going to be the first of, I think, 2 that were not called by monarchs. This one was called by the regent, Charles VIII's sister, older sister, Anne of Bejuan. And the regency was challenged by their cousin, Louis, the Duke of Orleans. Now, one thing I want to begin with is how two unique things about this whole regency was it wasn't Charles's mother, because his mother was still alive. His sister actually was politically was really politically active, and so it took the regency title from their mother, and then also Charles the 13th. Sorry, yeah, was also 13, and you'll remember from class. French monarchs usually take power between like 13 to 15, like very young. Except in this case, that's not what happened. Charles's father, Louis the 11th, was very forward thinking. He was very planning. He was very planning and forward ahead, and so he wrote in his will that Charles would not be able to take the throne like until he was 21. So the idea being when Charles comes to the throne, if a child monarch is very manipulated by the nobles, so if he comes to the throne when he's 21, he can't be manipulated. And so while coming back to it, called this States General because of the instability it caused between her and the Duke Louis, and so the State General actually went on to platform a series of reforms to the government and taxation. However, these reforms failed to materialize. Nothing came of it, even though they were really ambitious for something that completely failed. And so while the States General of 1484 was a failure, it actually legitimized the regent on and allowed her to cement authority over Charles VIII, her brother. And so another thing is that a significant aspect of this assembly was that it put greater importance on the third estate, with specifically representatives from the rural areas now being included for the first time. So previously, most peasants had been represented by their lords and nobility. Now it's peasants voting and electing for these officials who then represent them in the third estate. And I think it was like 250 people. So now you really start to see this large scale, these massive hundreds of people in these general estates. So now, moving on. A crisis of faith. We're going to be going over two now. They're pretty closely tied. So after the Reformation, there was a massive schism growing between Catholics and Protestants, or as in France being called the Huguenots. So because of this, because of the crown's financial issues and because of this growing schism, Francis II of France called for a States General to fix these issues. However, he died before it could actually begin, and so when it began, it just completely failed, and nothing became of it, and it just fell apart. And its failure, as well as a bunch of other things, would then lead down the road to what I'm about to talk about, the Wars of Religion. So then the next one, called by his son, King Henry III, the States General of 1576. Henry III called it because of he's trying to seek religious reconciliation in the ongoing wars of religion. Because about a year ago, the Huguenots, the Protestants, were able to get another concessions from the monarchy that gave rights and protection to them. So now it was hoped that they could use that, as well as bring the Catholics to the table to finally clean the board, fix everything. However, that failed because the States General was dominated by the Catholic League, and so not only did it fail to fix any of the problems, it also this time weakened royal authority. So then moving on to the Catholic League, now they would dominate the next two. So then a couple of years later, Henry III again called for one, this time during an ongoing civil war between the three Henrys, because there were three Henrys. You get the idea there. So and then another Henry, Duke Henry, was challenging it, but basically, King Henry III was trying to strengthen his weak monarchy, and so when he called it, the Catholic League again came. They again dominated the assembly, led by Duke Henry of Guise, and failed to have anything. Nothing happened, and it just another failure. And because of all the tension that arose from this, Henry III had Duke Henry assassinated, which destabilized his reign, obviously, a bad idea, and then killed him. So two Henrys down. And then now we got another Henry coming in for another one. So then a couple years later, the States General again of 1593 was called, this time by the Catholic League. So another time when the monarchy, when the king didn't call it, and after the assassination of Henry III, there was a succession crisis going on, and currently the guy that was considered the forefront of this was Henry IV, who was King Henry of Navarre, who was one of the Henrys in the Civil War, and he was a Protestant. So this was a big issue for the Catholic League, which was dominating the estates. So they were able to successfully stop Henry IV from being made king. However, so while the States General was a failure, it didn't resolve anything. It just stopped Henry from taking the throne. It also was pointless, because then Henry, a couple years later, would convert to Catholicism. So in the end, it was kind of a win-win for the Catholics in this case. So then moving on now, we're going to go to the Estates General of 1614 to 1615. This was called by the 13-year-old King Louis XIII. It sought to fix France's financial issues caused by the previous wars, including the wars of religion. The assembly failed to do anything. You see a string of failures here. And in this time, there was actually, instead of there being some sort of like political league stopping it, it was infighting between the estates. One instance was the Third Estate refusing to agree to the abolition of the sale of venal offices unless the nobility gave up some of their privileges, which they refused. If you remember, venal offices were one of the only ways people from the Third Estate could ascend to nobility to the Second Estate, and basically it was one of the only ways they could become socially mobile. And so removing of this would basically almost close off any upwards mobility. And the nobility, of course, did not want to give up any of their privileges. And this was just one of the series of infighting happening between the several estates. And so this is why I think this Estates General mirrors the one we're going to hear about, the last one we're going to hear about, that comes a century and a half later, like almost a perfect mirror of them. So that now, moving on to the last one, of course, here's a picture first, of the Estates General of 1789. First off, of course, the legs. We got to talk about, in the left corner here, the legs. I don't know what's going on with French people here, but they're really loving their legs. But also you see here the nobility. Maybe he's, I don't know, probably the cardinal or something. Sorry. And then over here, I think this would be the nobility. So the clergy, my bad. This would be the nobility. And then here, I believe, is the Third Estate. And you really see, one thing I really see is that no one really cares. There's a lot of, like, these people over here just aren't even looking. And they're over here, it's just a lot of, it shows a sort of disinterest and almost chaos going on. And just further points what I'm about to talk about. So the last one, the Estates General of 1789, it was called by King Louis XVI. It sought to address the ongoing financial crisis and social unrest plaguing the end of the Ancien regime. And the assembly, of course, failed. It was riddled with infighting, provided no solutions, and in the end, its failure not only didn't fix the issue, it actually made it worse. So it would then lead to the collapse of the regime. So now moving on to primary source analysis, I'm going to be talking about the Cahiers de Doléances. It was a list of grievances collected from each of the three estates between January and April. So like just literally like, I think 3 months. And you see, there was like 60,000 of these documents, and most of them coming from the Third Estate. And a common thing among them was taxation reform and political representation. And I think these grievances just really represent the Estates General as a whole. The cat showing that no matter what you do, it won't go back in the bag. The French people wanted reform, and if the monarchy couldn't achieve it, then something else would. And I believe that's it. Yep, we're excited. I thank you, everyone. This has been a great talk. Have a great day. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.